Yo, uh, today I'm gonna talk about this book. I read it in Spanish, but it's basically Los Innovadores, the Innovators, and I already finished it. So as you can see here, I already finished it, and I just wanted to talk about it. Um, Basically, what I can say about this book is, you know, very interesting. Obviously, it talks about the innovators, like the title says, the subtitles, the geniuses that invented the world. And you know, where do I start? It's a very interesting book because basically this book talks about the geniuses, the human beings that have invented the future, right? Or the future that we currently live in, with things like this computer where I'm recording, right? Um, what else? My phone, and basically anything, and also the services that we use every day, like YouTube, Google, Twitter, and obviously what is on top of that. Sorry, what is below that, which is basically things like the internet, the web, and then what is below that, the internet, and then with that, what is below that, the and then what is below that, the computers, right? So this basically covers everything. It literally covers from transistors, from microchips, from chips to computers, to the personal computers, to the internet, no, sorry, to software. You know, covers basically like the most important things that humans have invented on hardware and software. And yeah, I mean, I don't know from what year is this book. I'm gonna research it because obviously right now with AI, it has become much more incredible. So the innovators, here you go. From 2014. Okay, so definitely, he didn't have time to catch up with AI, or at least the current AI that exists. I'm talking about Walter Isaacson. He has wrote some incredible books, like these ones. Well, the only ones that I have read are these one from Elon Musk and Steve Jobs, and this one. So those are the three that I have read about. But the other ones seem very interesting. But the other ones seem very interesting, like the Leonardo da Vinci one, Codebreaker, like all of them. Einstein, like it's basically biographies, and that's what I like about this author. He literally just goes in depth a lot about the most innovative people of our time, right? And from history. So yeah, it's been very interesting. So yeah, it's very interesting, and this book really talks about everything related to technology and the technology that we have right now of ones and zeros, right? Because obviously technology can be anything. This essentially is like technology, because all the ingredients and all the everything that is in here that basically allows to have a better skin is a technology, right? So this is also a technology. I'm talking about the technology of bits, right? Ones and zeros, of computers, of the internet, and all that. And as you can see, this book was published on 2014. So right now, obviously, with AI, boom, that happened on 2020, around 2020 or 2022, I don't know. Let me actually research. When was GPT 3? June 2020? I thought it was in 2022. 2018. I mean, yeah, but obviously when everyone knew about it was in 2020, right? Around 2020. So yeah, like around 2020, 2022 is when they first released that. 2022, I think this was their biggest moment because 3.5 was the biggest one, 2022. Yeah, this was the moment where I actually um noticed that this exists, right? I remember watching a YouTube video that was talking about this, and I was like, "What?" And then I went to the website and I actually tried out, and it blew my mind. So, it's not that I didn't knew about artificial intelligence, but this literally ChatGPT moment was a moment when I was like, "Damn, like AI is real, and is getting very advanced, and is very important for humanity." That's when I fucking realized it, because I knew what was artificial intelligence before, but I really never paid attention to it until this happened. So it was incredible what happened here. And yeah, obviously it was released in 2022. This book was released in 2014. So we cannot really talk about that way. But what we can talk about definitely is what is this book about? Because at the end of the day, the most important thing, I guess, when reading a book is obviously what's the objective when reading the book. Then, once you have the objective, go read the book and attack that objective. Like, for example, if the objective that I had here was just to know about the creation of the internet, I just go to the index. Where's the index? You just go to the index and I just see when is the internet mentioned. And I attack the book, right? That way, in order to not waste my time on all the other pages. In this case, my objective was literally just to read the whole thing, and kind of more in an entertainment thing, right? I just wanted to learn about everything that this book had, so it was not very intentional, but it was definitely interesting. Because I read everything, and yeah, the primary things that I get from this book is basically how is I think it's two primary concepts. You know, maybe the book had like more primary concepts, but the ones that I got from my reading were first how like innovation and basically all these technologies that we can see here, which is a great way of looking at the future, right? Like how humans have behaved in order to create all of this, and how probably humans will behave to create things like this, or future AIs, or the future robotics. This seems like it's gonna be the biggest product in the world, right? Like humanoid robots. Like no, these ones are like not bullshit robots. I'm talking about these type of robots, like for example the Tesla one, or the one from Figure AI, or the one from I don't remember the other ones, but these kind of robots. So this really gives you a great way of like how basically innovation is created. Because at the end of the day, when you look at the history, it's like you start to notice patterns, right? and then a lot of events, and then that really gives you more predictive power for the future. And that's what we're doing here, right? So the first idea that I really got, like, and I kind of already thought about it, but this like reinforced the fact, or that fact, is the fact that humans, like, at the end of the day, humanity. How can I explain it? Basically, humanity, each generation of humanity, right, of humans, builds an onion. It's basically like building an onion. So you can really think about it. Think about the internet, right? Think about the thing that I'm currently using, which is this browser, right, as they call it. That technology is that whole thing is basically like the thing that I'm using right now is basically an onion. And let me explain. I haven't really thought about it like an onion, but it's basically like an onion. So you have the first layer, which is the internet, like the browser, right? The browser technology. Then you peel the onion. Then you have another layer, which in this case is the web, right? At the end of the day, all the current browsers like Safari, Chrome, Brave, I'm currently using Brave is another browser, and all these browsers are based on the web, which is another technology, right? It's like an underlying technology that that browsers are built on top of them. Then you peel it off and you go to another layer, which is the internet, right? Which is built on upon the sorry. Ah, shit. Have internet, right? Or I might also argue that you have like this computer, right? This software, this OS from Mac OS in this case, where the browser is on top. And then you have this computer, right? So, and then you have this computer, right? So this thing that I can touch, the hardware. And then you have the internet, which the internet in reality is just like something more about hardware than software, which is literally, or at least from my limited understanding of that, is like all the, like literally the network of cables that we have all around the world that are that connect our computers all around the world, right? So we have obviously the modem, which is connected, as you can see, to this computer, and then that modem is connected to the light, right, to the power grid, and that power grid goes is connected already to, all over the world basically, and obviously you have the internet cables, which are on the ocean. A lot of them are in the ocean. You can actually see here some of the internet cables that are around the ocean and basically that connect the world. And it's very interesting because a lot of people think about the internet as, a system that is on the sky or on space with satellites, but it's mostly on the ocean. If you can see right here, right? So it's all interconnected and basically leads us to be able to send a message from here, China to Australia to all over the place. Now, obviously, right now it's becoming much more of an adoption. The internet that is not from the ocean, but actually from the sky or from space, which is obviously the satellites, internet, primarily Starlink, right? So you have Starlink. We all know about Starlink, right? And it's basically literally just satellite internet. So in this case, instead of being in the power grid or through these cables, it's literally just your modem connected to your computer, and then that modem is receiving and sending and receiving signals constantly to a satellite in space, right? You can actually also see the map of the satellites that are on space right now. So all those white dots are the Starlink satellites. And that's another structure, right? That's another structure of the internet. But basically what I'm trying to say here is that The these technology that I'm using right now, which is the browser, is like it's like an onion because it has layers and layers below it, and basically all technologies are like onions, and basically each onion was built by a generation of humans, right? Which is like roughly 25 to 30 years. But I could guess, people are understanding this. So, for example, this computer, which is Apple, like this computers, like, with like the generation that made computers, like personal computers thing, was, the generation of Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, right? Then there was another generation of innovators, right? As the book title talks about, which was about people who built on top of the hardware, which is also a thing that this book talks about. How people back then, when this hardware thing was, and was getting more innovative, when this computer thing was really taking off, like AI is taking off right now, which is was probably like in 60s, 70s, right? Like 50s. Yeah. It's just in the 20th century, right? Basically, how they thought, or like most of the people who were like working on this technology and innovating and improving this technology thought that hardware was going to be uh, far more important than software. And if you really think about it, it turned out to be a totally different way. I mean, obviously, hardware is still very important because at the end of the day, it's literally the reason why I'm able to view all this, right? But software was very underestimated because now we obviously know the incredible amount of value that software brings, right? All these, like, essentially, like the biggest companies in the world, if we look at them, biggest or most valuable companies, for example, the most valuable companies in the world, a lot of them, I'm not saying most of them, because for example, the top one is hardware primarily, which is also software, right? But like basically what I'm trying to say is how hardware was thought to be more important than software. And in a lot of things, it turned out to be the totally different way, right? Software really became something very big. Like, for example, Microsoft, Amazon, Google. Obviously, right now, they also are very big on hardware, like all these platforms. For example, Facebook just released their new glasses, which are literally like the Apple Vision Pro, but in a glass, and that's incredible hardware, right? But basically, what I'm trying to say is that people back then, when they were like building this hardware, underestimated the value of software that turned out to be very valuable. In a lot of cases, more valuable, right? More impactful than just hardware. And this is something very sad, but at the end of the day, that was the at that time how a lot of people thought. Basically, because they underestimate, and it's talked about in the book, the reason why they're underestimated. The reason, like, because they underestimated software against hardware, that was a job that a lot of women were involved in software, and obviously that's that not ideal, right? It's just because something feels like it's less important, you're gonna give the job to women. Obviously, back then in the 20th century, it was a very different time, right? 1 century ago, how they thought about this gender stuff, and obviously, they have made progress here and there, but that's an interesting way of how they thought back then, right? At the end of the day, a lot of like basically a lot of the programmers back in the day, in the previous century, which were programming all these computers and whatever, they were a lot of women. Women were a lot of the, like most, I think most of the programmers back then were women. Right now, I don't know the exact figure. Like, let me actually research it. Men versus women programmers. Yeah, like right now, the vast majority of developers are males, accounting for 91%. Wow. Yeah, that's totally different. But it's very interesting how at the beginning, most of the developers, essentially, or how we call them, like programmers or whatever, they were mostly women, and right now it's mostly men. So it's a very interesting, I don't know, a very interesting statistics, and obviously shows a little bit of like you know, the the way in which they thought before, right? So obviously, I don't agree with that, right? I don't agree with that, but it was very interesting to me because since we are now used to more like literally male and males being the majority in programming, we thought that was the case um, all over history, right? But it wasn't. It wasn't. By the way, one of the human beings that is right here was actually, or for a lot of people, there's a debate, and this book also talks about it. Uh, if he was the first programmer or not, is actually this woman right here, Ada Lovelace. I don't know how to pronounce that name, but yeah, here, Ada Lovelace. How do you pronounce this? Well, basically, a lot of people consider her the first programmer in the world, right? I don't know how to pronounce this. Yeah, as you can see here, La Madre de la Programación, or the mother of programming. It was not actually that he was actually programming the computers, at least from the book that talks about her. It's mostly about the theories, right? She was writing like essentially algorithms. It was literally writing programs, but like hand and all that. So at the end of the day, it was in the 1800s. That's also something very interesting from this book. Like, this is another thought that a lot of people, including me, have, which was, well, the computers, like, all these computer stuff, software stuff, is very recently, right? Humans started to actually think about it very recently, like 1900, 1950. But if you look back, this has been thought, because obviously it's very different to have the ideas, to actually implement the ideas. It's very different, those two things. But at the end of the day, a lot of people think that these ideas were thought in like the 1950s, 1960s, whenever the things started to be implemented. And the reality is not. Like, look at this. This was in the 1800s, 1830s, 1840s, where she was essentially thinking about all these ideas, right? And actually doing something about it, like writing some programs. Obviously, another way we do it right now, but essentially being the first programmer, right? And also we have Charles Babbage, which was also someone mentioned on this book. And look at him. He was, yeah, 1800s basically. And in this guy was more about the hardware, like trying to build a computer and whatever. And here was more about the software. But yeah, you can basically see how this was thought about a long time ago. And it's very interesting because then throughout history, as this book implies, there's, like, for example, in 1960s, 1970s, there's a lot of people that thought about the world that we live in today, right? The world in which we can communicate instantly from one place to another of the world. And obviously, they weren't talking about, oh, you have Google, you have the internet, you have, like, they weren't talking about these concepts that they didn't existed, but they were talking about the ideas, right? That eventually led other people to actually do them, right? And I mean, I don't know if this is like dumb thinking or what, but I thought before that, you just have different eras where people just think one way, right? Where, from the 1950s, people start to think about computers or these ideas and start to implement the ideas and actually do something about it. But no, that was like, this has been thought about a long time ago, and it goes back to my point about the layers of technology that each generation starts to bring something to the table, right? So, for example, here she bring a lot of very valuable ideas to the table of programming and all that, and then people, one generation later, in the next generations, pick up those ideas or maybe they actually didn't knew about her, but improved the ideas that she had, right? Or maybe by improving the actual ideas or actually implementing the ideas, right? So that's my argument. I The book doesn't talk mostly about this. This is just like the thing that I got reinforced, which is that all technologies and like all innovation is just like it's like onion that is built in layers and layers and layers of knowledge essentially, and of human beings and generations of human beings that have done one thing, then one thing, blah 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 blah. Like for example, what I described, the technology that I'm using right now. So one generation, thought about the ideas and then also implemented the computers. Then personal computers became a thing. Then other generations, like for example, Bill Gates started to focus a lot on software and actually doing something with software or whatever, and that started to actually, bring another layer, and then the other layer where people started to think about other ideas, and then started to implement them, and then it came Google, right? All these like the things. Now first came the web, right? Email. For example, email. That was an interesting fact. Email invention year was in 1970 something, 1971, which is crazy. Like the email was invented in 1971. I thought it was like in the 2000s or something. But no, email was invented a long time ago. It's crazy. But yeah, like we had people who invented email in the 70s, 80s, 90s, invented the web, the internet, the first networks that were not called the internet, but they were like basically connections between universities to connect computers. They were the first layers of the internet, and then people started to just build on top of that, right? Google, Amazon, and then we have Brave, which is the current technology that I'm using right now. Brave browser release date, which was in 2019. It's not that long time ago. And then, yeah, that's basically my first like core idea from this book, which is not mostly talk about it on the book, but really reading about it reminded me of this. Because at the end of the day, a lot of it starts with the people that were in the 1800s, 1700s, 1900s, with ideas, with interesting ideas and then people in the 1950s, 1960s, 70s, 80s, 2000s, where they implemented the ideas from these guys, right? From the previous guys, from the previous generations. And it's basically the point that I'm making, right? It's just an onion of layers, right? Of layers of ideas, of things. And technology is built upon another and another and another and another one. And it's very interesting. Now, another one point that I'm thinking about right now is how, like, for all these innovators actually created an impact on this world. And this is actually what the end of the book talks about, which is the connection of fields. It talks about primarily about the connection of arts and science, right? And how that connection created very valuable, not only companies, but very valuable technologies, very useful technologies, more friendly technologies. It's funny, there was one guy, I mean, they cover everything here, like, or at least the most famous technology that we use right now. For example, the mouse, right? The mouse. So in this book talks about how one guy, which is actually on the book cover, Steve Jobs, thought about the mouse totally different from another guy, which I don't remember the name. But this other guy wanted the mouse to be as complex as possible. He wanted the mouse to have 9 buttons, and it's crazy, right? 9 buttons just to make it complex, right? Just to be seen as complex. And then you have Steve Jobs, which wants it to be as simple as possible, right? Like just look at the Apple mouse, the mouse from Apple, right? Like look at that. Like in here, there's really not any buttons, right? So compare these to the other mouse, which I don't remember. I wish I could remember the name of this guy in order to show it. But it really also tells you about the differences of thinking, right? At the end of the day, most people were not gonna use that very complex mouse, right? With 9 buttons. Most people just want to use this one because it's more easier, more intuitive. And that's a lot of the things that this book talks about, or at least at the very final of the book, um, very end of the book, where the actual like people, the actual technologies that actually had a profound impact on the world were the ones who were able to connect arts and technology, right? And obviously, and Apple is a very great example. They really cared about those two things, not only creating a very great technology product, but also creating a very like making that technology product look beautiful, right? Have a beautiful design, have that kind of artistic design. As you can see, these designs is beautiful, right? Obviously, a lot of people argue that these designs are pretty dumb because you literally need to charge it on the back. I think it's pretty dumb, like as you can see here. But the design is pretty beautiful, right? It's simple. Is you can clearly see how those two things are combined. And at the end of the day, Apple is one of the most. I mean, just look at here. It's literally the most valuable company. Whereas, oh shit, most valuable companies like Apple is the most valuable company right now, right? So they clearly had some success in that, and also other like companies, right? Like Google, like basically this is a great way of seeing which companies had success, because when people bet money, they actually believe on the thing, right? Um, so as you can see, like all these platforms had like kind of those connections. I mean, not only arts but also humanities. Like for example, Facebook, right, which is now Meta. Um, have a great technology that connects people, right? Connects people is like kind of the humanities part, and that was a very interesting point, right? Like, and those are like the two main points that I got from this book. Like, the funny thing from this is that most of the book is not talking about this. It's just giving you a reinforcement of those ideas. For example, the first that idea that I talk about of the onions, of the layers of that build technologies built upon them. Like at the end of the day, when you start to read through the history of these technologies and through teach technology, it's not they're actually talking about this concept, but this concept just gets more reinforced, right? So that's why it was like the primary idea for me. And yeah, at the end of the end of the book really talks about how the future, I mean, this was in 2014, was going to be more like the technologies were going to really change the world, impact the world. We're going to be technologies that kept like continued combining this part of the arts, humanities, like all that, and the technology, right? And I think he really nailed it because right now, if you look at it, this was written in 2014. Right now we are in the 2020s, 2025, and you can clearly see that with AI, right? So, for example, AI has become more interconnected with because it's an incredible improvement of technology, but not only that, but it also in it's an incredible improvement on creativity, right? Because at the end of the day, obviously, seems like AIs can write poetry, like LLMs, right? AI models like ChatGPT and all those can write poetry, can create images, which obviously there's a debate there. Is it really art or isn't? Yeah, is not art or whatever, or is AI already capable of enough of creating art or being creative? That's still like a debate. But and then that like a thing that you cannot really question is that this really has made humans more creative, right? It gives you ideas, it gives you different designs. So I think it's something that really nailed this book because at the end of the day, that's what's happening, and that's what's gonna happen in the future even more, right? Um, there's a lot of ideas, right? I think those are, in my opinion, the most important ones. Maybe the author wanted to say that other ideas were the most important ones, Walter Isaacson. But from what I read, I just got those. For example, I'm gonna read literally the last couple of sentences, which basically says the following. Until now, I mean it's in Spanish, so it's gonna be a little bit difficult to read it, translate it in real time, but basically says until now, a greater part of innovation has been about uh, combining the or transforming the old stuff to like new stuff, right? Old stuff being like books, like this one, newspapers, articles, blogs, songs, TV programs, movies, on new stuff, which are digital things, right? All of that has become digital, right? But long term, the interaction between technology and arts will be transformed in the forms of expression and formats and mediatic formats, totally new, like totally new mediatic formats. I think he's literally predicting ChatGPT, right? Because it's a totally new format in which technology and arts are being combined even more. In my opinion, I think that's a great like prediction. This innovation will come from people who are capable of combining the beauty, the engine. Sorry, are are gonna come from people who are able to combine the beauty to the engineering, right? The humanities to the technology, and the poetry to the processing. In other words, it will come from people, spiritual people like no, it will come from fuck, I forgot how you say herederos. Herederos. Here says herederos. Here's the el. It will come from Heirs of Ada Lovelace, which basically is telling how Ada Lovelace was, which was a lot about combining technology with arts. So yeah, it will come from people like Ada Lovelace, people who and creators who are capable of flourishing where in that situation where art are interconnected with sciences and people who are able to be rebels in a very rebel capable way of amazement, right? That is going to open the doors of beauty. Basically, talking about that, right? And that's literally the final of the book. So, I mean, these part just of acknowledgments. I'm not interested in that. But yeah, that was a very interesting book. Um, yeah, that was like the most important ideas. Now, something I need to really improve on reading in general is like actually the focus that I put into and actually what I do after reading. Because, for example, this thing, as I said, I just read it as entertainment kind of. And obviously, a curiosity of learning more about like all these technologies that we have gone through. And I really learned a lot. But also, I think I could have learned more or at least understood more about all these if I actually not only had the focus of entertainment, but actually had the focus of understanding, right? And at the end of the day, like, just doing something about it. Like, that's the reason why I'm doing this video, in order to do something about the knowledge that I have acquired, right? In this case, is explaining what I acquired. That's a great way of learning, because you basically force your brain to like you test your brain if it really understood something, right? And yeah, very interesting book, man. I'm very. I think it was a very interesting book. Now, obviously, wanting to do is just look at situations where I can apply these, right? Because obviously, just reading for the sake of absorbing knowledge is not a very smart thing to do. Like at the end of the day, you're wasting a little bit of your time there, here and there. So actually, applying it somewhere, in some case, I think is more valuable. So, yeah. But yeah, it was a very interesting book. And by the way, this book is literally from my school, as you can see here. I haven't, bro. I literally told the woman that is on the library. I told her, hey, yeah, I'm gonna get it back in 2 weeks. Guess how much has passed since I got this book? Like total months, like 4 months. And damn, man, I don't know if they're gonna charge me a lot, but whatever. Yeah, that was basically it. Very interesting book, bro. Um, Very interesting, and I just want to learn more.